Just waiting for a few other people. They're starting to trickle in. Hopefully everyone's having a good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. Give everyone just another minute. Should have plenty of time today for covering the material and then just Q&A. And just as we go along, if you've got questions, feel free to kind of put those in the little Q&A section here in the Zoom. We'll definitely, like I said, we'll have plenty of time to go through a lot of those as those questions come up. And we'll get started. All right, looks good. Well, hey, let's get started. I appreciate everyone joining us for our late January webinar. We tend to do a couple of these during the month, kind of a cross section of just StrikeGraph related demonstrations to give you a sense of what we do from a product perspective, as well as just informational ones. StrikeGraph tends to be, we love to kind of share our learnings with the broader community out there. So you'll see quite a few of these. Definitely keep an eye on StrikeGraph.com as those webinars come out. We love to post those and love to, again, be able to share that knowledge. Just from a quick agenda perspective, this should roughly, from a presentation standpoint, 35, 40 minutes-ish. And then so we'll definitely have plenty of time for QA, as well as make sure we be respectful of everyone's time and get you to your next meeting with no issues. I'll give you a little bit from a background perspective, a little bit of kind of my history. I think it plays to, this topic is just, I'm pretty darn passionate about it based on kind of my experience and challenges that I saw as a founder. So I want to be able to share those learnings where I can, and hopefully, you know, if anything, maybe help you avoid some of the traps, pitfalls, things that I ran into and wish I had done differently back then, as I sort of progressed throughout my career and learned a little bit about this space. I wish I was armed with that knowledge or a little earlier. So a couple of things though around just StrikeGraph in general. If you're not familiar with StrikeGraph, certainly, you know, we'll happy to, you know, reach out to us. We're happy to share sort of our story, but I think it kind of speaks to what we're about. We love, our mantra really is just to help customers deliver successful outcomes. So we love to educate. We love to kind of understand where customers are going and help them get there. So, you know, kind of a little bit of a shameless plug here for StrikeGraph, but if you're interested after this and going a little bit deeper about some of the stuff you heard today, as well as we love to learn about folks that are running into these challenges to see if there's anything we can help with. Feel free to reach out to us. I'll give you some information at the end, just to, you know, be able to give us a shout if you need to. But as far as just diving into this topic around, you know, a couple of things that founders should know about a SOC 2, just a little bit about myself. I'm a co-founder of StrikeGraph, as well as I run business development. So I get to work with customers early stage of establishing a relationship with them, as well as throughout their compliance and their SOC 2 journey. So it's kind of the best role within the company, because my day-to-day operations are just around talking to customers, which is fantastic. My background though happens to be, and this is, I don't think a lot of folks, especially on the software side of the fence, it's almost like you don't set out to dive deep into compliance. I think a lot of folks that probably knew me a long time ago, earlier in my career, if they knew that I would end up in compliance, they'd say, I'm not sure if I see that happening. But my background, and I've had an opportunity really, you know, it just, you know, I've just had the good fortune really to be on the ground floor, founder of some amazing companies. And those companies have been ones that have been venture capital backed, that they've actually gone public. And some of them have just been bootstrapped, kind of the scrappy ones with some good outcomes. And I have a development background, but I also kind of morphed that over the years into sales and back to products. So I've kind of seen like both sides of the proverbial software fence. And I kind of bring that background up because this is what started me down the path towards compliance. It's what started me down the path towards realizing just how important your security program really is to your company. I would argue that, as early as maybe 5 years back, certainly 5 to 10, when you looked at a security program, you really just looked at it as, well, we got to do this, or hope we'll get our arms around it at some stage. And we really started to see that shift, right? The reliance on SaaS, the reliance on third-party vendors, software companies, to kind of run our tech stack, as well as operate our businesses, just became just mission critical, right? So, as I was kind of going through and running into this, both on the technical side or the product side of the fence, as well as the sales side of the fence, those early days across those different companies, I found myself when I would engage with maybe our internal sales team or with a prospective customer, I was always reactionary. I was always kind of playing this, defensive posture of having to get questionnaires, like people trying to understand that, what is your company doing with my data? How are you protecting it? How are you securing? What's your policy and procedure around this? What does your business continuity plan look like? How does disaster recovery look like? What happens if there's a data breach? I mean, just like this endless sort of back and forth. And I always felt like I was on my heels. I was having to write policies to answer questions. I was getting bombarded on a Friday with security questionnaires that needed to be turned around by, Monday AM, or we wouldn't we'd lose the deal. I'd get these RFPs or RFIs all over the places. And a lot of times I'm sitting here, and it was kind of like security in this ad hoc mode, where you're sort of doing this stuff on the fly based on what you hear, instead of really how, thoughtfully, how should I structure this? How should I really be thinking about operationalizing or internalizing? I was just sort of spewing things out there, adding things to the product. A lot of times this would have direct and material impact into some of those deals. So we would close deals, and there'd be clauses or exemptions in there that had security provisions that you'd have to dance around. And that's just not a great way of operating things. It's just not a great way of doing business, and it's not really scalable or maintainable over time. So certainly within StrikeGraph, but as I got a little bit maybe more mature in seeing a few of these things and knowing how the movie plays out, I started to kind of compile that list of, okay, the next time I start a company, I would take these steps. And that's really the 5 things that I want to cover today around, hopefully, being able to be a little more proactive, making sure you don't run into some of these traps that I certainly ran into throughout my career. One of the first things I kind of realized around just in general, is whether it's SOC 2 or just structuring your security program in general, you can never start early enough. This was definitely something that I saw where, a problem for another day. Hey, I'm young, I'm still in a pilot mode, not sure what the product is actually going to look like in the next 12 to 18 months. These were all sort of excuses, frankly, that I was sort of telling myself that it was okay to really not address it, to not formalize a program. It's not that we're doing bad practices or not securing information or anything like that. It was really just the discipline, the formalizing it, the documenting it in an appropriate way, and kind of adding it as part of doing your day-to-day business. I should have started way early, like almost at the onset of the product development. It is so easy to incorporate those behaviors at an early stage of your company, especially if you're a company as you're growing and you're scaling, you're bringing on people on the development side of the fence, the sales side of the fence. This doesn't mean rush out and go get a chief compliance officer or a CISO or something like that. It just means adding that discipline at the earliest part. It kind of builds that operational muscle memory the earlier you start. And look, if your path is really going down a SOC 2, then from a timeline perspective, you got to start early. Type 1, you got different sort of SOC 2s in here, type 1 or type 2. Type 1, look, you can't just squeeze that in 2 weeks and you're done. You're gonna need a little bit of a runway there. You got some scheduling that needs to come into play with pen testers and getting on the auditor's calendar and things like that. There's definitely going to be things like gaps, right? Especially if this is your first time in. you're going to need to make sure that you know, if your goal is to get a SOC to report in the next quarter to 2 quarters, you really got to work your way backwards and say, how do I set myself up for success? And even if you have a halfway, you know, like formalized program, it's that alignment, identifying gaps, addressing those gaps, and then just the scheduling aspect of it. Start earlier than you think. Like that is the number one thing that I wish I knew in some of my previous gigs. The number two thing, and this is sort of, I think this mindset is changing in a big way, but certainly when I first kind of got into this or was running into this, there was a lot of, there was a view that a security program was more of a cost center, right? So if I was a chief product officer and I was trying to go get budget for a SOC 2 audit or cybersecurity reviews or pen testing or whatever it was, you know, I always kind of felt, well, about 10 years ago, I would run into this sort of wall of like, well, that's not budgeted, or do we really need this expense? It was always viewed as an expense. And I think we're changing that. I think people today are realizing that this is something we have to do, right? It's not so much a cost center, it's actually more of a sales accelerant. Like if I'm in sales, I want my organization to have a SOC 2 report because it's going to help me. It's going to help, like, that's going to help me when I get into procurement, when I get into contracts, when I have a CTO or CIO from a prospective customer talk to me, I can slide that report across the table versus having to play defense, grab a whole bunch of people, you know, get them in a room, fill out security questionnaires, go through sort of that security theater that always happens. That security program I can leverage. It's going to help me against larger competition. One of the first things that I saw, it was really a bootstrapped company that I was building. It was in the financial services space. I was going up against a lot larger companies, and the fact that I could put sort of a frame around my security program, it helped get across that, like, how large is your company? Oh, you're like less than 10 people. Well, that's a little risky. Oh, okay. Well, you've got the discipline. You've really thought this out. You've got everything structured. In fact, you're better organized than some of your competition out there. It really leveled things out. It showed a maturity in an organization that frankly allowed us to kind of, use a cliche here, like punch above our weight class as it related to closing some business and just get some real good sales velocity. So don't minimize this. Like, this is not a cost, you know, like a cost center. It's not it's a cost, absolutely, to get everything in order. But from a revenue perspective, like closing revenue faster, larger deals, getting actually asked, you know, being involved in a deal cycle, you know, don't minimize the fact that a SOC 2 can help get you there. I think it's so critically important to have that mindset that your security program is such a valuable asset that you have to invest in it. And that investment is going to pay off in terms of revenue that comes in the door. It's really important too to align what you're doing to a standard, or in our case, a security framework. We certainly feel like SOC 2 is just a huge one. I mean, there's others that are out there. SOC 2 is definitely has emerged as, I would call it. It's not a de facto standard by any stretch of the imagination, but here in the States, as it relates to software companies, it's very common, and common in a good way, right? People are really looking at that SOC 2 report and saying, hey, this is pretty powerful. It's independently audited. It spans not just the tech side of the house, but how you govern and how you manage employees, how you run your operations, how you run your company. So it's such a broad coverage area that it's just a great place to start. And it doesn't force, a SOC 2 doesn't force you to completely change what you're doing. Like, a SOC 2 is not, here's how you run your business, here's the 50 things you gotta do. It lets you really take your business and what you're trying to accomplish and align it. And I love that philosophy, right? It's a little bit different than ISO and some of the other standards that says, hey, when you build a practice, this is what your incident management should look like. This is what your change policy should be. This is exactly how, like, it's not prescriptive as much as it is encompassing. And I think that is critically important because it lets a smaller company kind of come on the highway a little bit easier. It allows you to get in there, kind of do what you do best, really have a framework, really have a program that represents your business, but at the same time have a tether to something that people are going to understand. And I think that's the biggest thing. Like when I was putting together security programs without sort of that thing to align it to, that's where that ad hoc kind of program sort of developed. Where if you look at, I would kind of retroactively look backwards after a few years and say, well, what are all these like practices we're doing? What are the behaviors? And some of them were great, but without that alignment, that sort of checkpoint to see what am I doing and how does it relate to sort of like a standards, what other people are, best practices. I really didn't have that sense of, well, isn't it an effective program or not? Am I investing my time and effort into areas where I probably shouldn't be? And maybe I have gaps in some critical areas that I've just never thought of. And it's also from a communication standpoint. Again, if I just kind of build out a security program and don't have that alignment, when I talk to somebody else, a prospective customer, it's really hard to convey that. Like, how do I communicate what my discipline, what I'm about, my practices and procedures, without really having, hey, we're aligned towards this standard. We're SOC 2. We handle security, we do privacy, and here's the controls that we have in place that align there. Chances are that person across the table has read a SOC 2 report more than once. They're riveting reads, but they'll probably look at it and say, "Oh, I get it. I see where you're at. I've looked at this before. I see how you're doing things." But we have a common language that we can use to have a conversation around our practices. And I think a SOC 2, and I'm a little biased on this one, I think it's a great launching point into additional frameworks. A lot of people will start with a SOC 2. They might need to go a little bit deep. They might start selling into Europe, so they might need to get into ISO a little bit more. But it's a great way to get moving. Maybe they sell to the federal governments, they do FedRAMP, so on and so forth. But it's just such a great core framework to have your entire program built on. I think it's fantastic from that perspective. Number 4 thing, and it's probably almost as important as the start early, it's scoping. It's making sure that your scope for your particular program is really dialed in. If you go after way too much, and this is kind of one of the traps that I fell into, where it was looking at the trust service criteria and just trying to figure out, like, well, what do I need to do to pass this? Probably not the right question that I should have been asking myself and my colleagues internally, because we started pulling controls out of thin air and kind of throwing the spaghetti against the wall to see, well, maybe what's going to stick. We really didn't look at things and say, well, what makes sense for us? Let's scope what makes sense for us and then align it to a standard. It was more, let's look at the standard and try and tease out what we need. So we really ballooned out our scope the first time around when we were looking at things, because we were just trying to go after what we felt was just everything. We were trying to go after what we thought an auditor would want to see versus looking at it the appropriate way. And anytime you scope, especially with this, if your scope isn't quite right, you're going to do too much. And in some cases, if you're really early stage, that scoping can really just be a boat anchor around just all your compliance efforts. I might be a 5-person shop, kind of still in that pre-revenue or early stage revenue. And absolutely, do I need to go get a SOC 2? Sure. But I should probably have my controls, my discipline, my practices better represent where I am from a company standpoint, kind of in that maturity cycle and just in the life cycle in general of a company. It should really reflect that versus trying to be aspirational, trying to put policies and procedures and practices in place that kind of frankly would look more like 100,000 person company. Like that's not what you want to do when you're just getting going, because that's the type of operational overhead that you can frankly do without, right? You don't want it to crush your business because you're kind of committing and you're biting off on way too much. So think good practice in here. What is the right thing here? What's a good practice to have around change management, incident management, vendor management? You don't have to have like all these different systems to go implement those. You want to put tooling and technology to facilitate those, to really streamline things where applicable. But I think vendor management's a great, kind of a great example, actually. I could be a 5-person company. Do I want to have vendor management into part of what I do? Absolutely. Should I have a policy? Absolutely. Should we sit down as a leadership team within that 5-person company and talk about the vendors on an annual basis to make sure that this is the right set of vendors I should be having? Absolutely. Should my vendor management practice, though, look like a Boeing's, a Microsoft's, an Amazon's, a Starbucks? No, not at all. Not even close, right? There's a way to right size everything and have a good practice. You will iterate over time. You will refine your controls. You will put in additional systems, checkpoints, so on and so forth. Call it complexity, but that's complexity that you're going to iterate and you're going to grow into. So don't start there, because if you do, you're just going to bury yourself with a ton of work. I always like to tell folks, hey, if we overscope something, it's just like in product, right? If I overscope a release, I'm going to overwork everybody to get to that scope, to meet those deliverables, to meet those deadlines. So just be very, very cautious of what you're doing. You want to absolutely right size everything that you do within this practice, because that's the way to accomplish what you're setting out to do. It's also a great way to get your SOC 2 initially. So you're that initial sort of SOC 2 report, whether it's a type 1 or a type 2, get that scope right, and you're going to set yourself up for success on the audit side of the fence as well. You can always revisit at the next period if you need to add additional controls, modify controls, whatever it looks like. But again, scope, get that scoping just really, really set. Big thing too is don't do it yourself. Definitely sounds like a shameless plug for somebody like StrikeGraph, right? And I guess I'm guilty of that one a little bit. But certainly I had help along the way. And anytime I tried to do anything, whether it was going after a SOC 2 or just putting the program, internal together, if I did it myself, I found that it was just, it was just too much. It was too much for one person to look at, as well as juggle your daily responsibilities. SOC 2 from an audit, just kind of carve that one out. Like if I'm going after a SOC 2, the audit itself is a big undertaking. There's a process, there's a procedure. You really want to have somebody that's done this before, that can help kind of guide you to the auditor's office, get you through the other side, show you, kind of help just be there. I mean, be there either as an extra set of eyes, an extra set of hands to help out in a lot of cases. If you do it yourself, you absolutely can do it yourself, and you can certainly have success. But it's not a trivial project, and it's the gotchas. It's the things around, being able to identify gaps, being able to look at those gaps, assess, and have the appropriate response. If you're just sort of doing that, and again, I was kind of guilty of this one on the do-it-yourself mode. Kind of saying, hey, we've got gaps here, but I'm not really sure. I'll just kind of Google and search and maybe find my way through it. You kind of muddle along, and you realize on the other side of it, you're like, it would have been a lot easier if I had reached out, if I'd had a conversation, worked the network, had somebody that had seen this play out before, and get their tips and tricks into the mix. This is definitely an area where a partner is gonna help you out. If you're on a tight time frame, to be quite honest, you definitely need a partner, because the risk of missing that timeline, maybe you've got contractual commitments that say, hey, you got to get a SOC 2 report done in the next, 90 days, 2 quarters, 3, whatever it might be. That's definitely, like, I start seeing that. And there's, if it's me, I'm reaching out, I'm finding a partner, I'm making sure that I don't miss something, like have that sort of self-inflicted problem where it's like, I missed it because I just didn't know what I didn't know as I was going through it. Find a partner, and it'll set you up for success longer term. Okay. A little bit of a bonus tip here. SOC 2, and I think this is something in particular, very specific around a SOC 2, it's a commitment. Any of these, any of these frameworks that you adopt, especially ones that are audited, I think a lot of folks, and they'll kind of come out the other side of getting that report issued, and it is an absolute cause for celebration. You should, celebrate the fact that this is a pretty big milestone, right, in your cybersecurity practice to have a SOC 2 report. But it's a commitment. It's not a set in stone commitment. But if I put things down there, if I have these controls that my auditor tested me on around all phases, technology, business, and employee related, they do act as almost a contract to your customers. You're really telling your customers that these are the things that I'm doing. These are my practices that I live by in my day-to-day operations. And too often we find folks coming out the other side of a SOC 2 that maybe don't operationalize that as well as they should. They don't really think of it. They just sort of say, yeah, I had some controls and they're on the paper, and we got through the audit, and then they almost forget about them. And a SOC 2 is not a one and done, right? You're coming back, whether that's kind of on an annual basis for a type 1 or a more periodic basis for a type 2. These are controls that you're saying, I am doing these. I'm not just kind of doing them once and forgetting about them. So you really want to approach it from that standpoint. If I say that I'm doing, incident response a certain way, and I've got a process and I've got systems and escalations and approvals, well, I want to follow that framework, because that's what I said I was going to do. Are you going to change and iterate and morph and grow those and sort of, refine those practices along the way? Absolutely. But as you do that and you get retested on those with the new process, again, it's still a commitment. It's an ongoing commitment. So what you really want to do here is, again, scoping is so critical there, because if I scope it properly, I'm getting the right control set that represents my business, and that control set are my practices, the way I approach everything. So when I communicate and hand that report over to a customer, they know when they read that, they can trust, right? I'm transparent in how I'm doing business and how I'm operating things. So I think it's just a big thing that you need to internalize, and you need to, really get your entire organization behind it. I think too often, right, people look at security and they'll say, cybersecurity program or security program, and they immediately think technology. Or they hear compliance and they don't think technology. They think, oh, compliance, well, that's just like a business problem. That's like a lawyer problem, maybe my COO. But if I'm a CTO, compliance, maybe there's some data stuff in there. I think, kind of the world that we're living in today, right? It's just everyone across the organization has to have that security mindset. They have to have that compliance and governance mindset in what they do. They need to have that rigor, that discipline around how they approach, how they work with customers, how they work with fellow employees, how data is exchanged, how they interact with key systems. Obviously, the consequences of not doing certain things can be big. Data breaches, obviously not good. Just having that, though, that sort of, controls are my commitment, my contract, how we're doing things, and rolling that out across an organization. That, I think, sets you up, or any company up, for really, really long-term success, which is what everyone is driving towards. Okay. I'm talking a lot, so I'm gonna go check the question and answers out there to see if anybody's put anything. We've also got Michelle Strickler on the joining us as well from StrikeGraph. Michelle's former, she likes to say she comes over from the dark side of auditing. But phenomenal person on the team, and definitely is always interested in sharing some experiences. So if there's any questions, we're happy to take those. Michelle, are you seeing any questions on your side?
Not yet, Brian.
Yeah, a quiet crowd today. Try to touch on a few of the questions that I typically get asked, and again, they're sort of like the pitfalls, or the early thing, just to sort of kind of throw a question. Oh, look, we might have something out there in the chat. Love it. Is there a given, I like this one, is there a given set of controls specific to a SOC 2? I think Michelle can give you sort of the SOC 2. So the fun thing, and I'll kind of butcher the terminology, and that's where Michelle comes in. She'll clean it up for me. The way to think about it, and the SOC 2 gives you common criteria. So a framework really of how to operate. But the nice thing about that SOC 2 is that the specific controls, the things that you're doing, you get to control what that is and align it to the SOC 2 itself. Now there is a common criteria set within like a bare minimum or MVP, if you will, around the SOC 2, but as it relates to controls, the wording, the lingo, it's yours. It's yours. That's what I really like about it, because a SOC 2, they have set the tone at the top. It's kind of a broad brushstroke, right? And there's some things underneath it, but how I want to implement that, how I want to satisfy that particular SOC 2 criteria, I might want to have board minutes published. I might want to have management, having a regular cadence with all employees and sharing information back and forth. So that control language, I actually control, but it lines up to a particular criteria itself. So that given set of controls, it's kind of a yes and a no. It's yes from a perspective of, SOC 2 says you got to have this as a bare minimum, but you have a lot of flexibility to really make the language, make the control set your own. How'd I do on that one, Michelle?
True to form, had technology issues, and right when that question was asked, my computer died.
I love it. I love it. So another great question out here, and this is sort of the proverbial $1 million question, right? How does a company save dollars and time in the process? And then there's a second part of the question I'll address. There's obviously a cost, right? The actual audit itself has a dollar amount. Quite often there's a preparer in the mix. And again, full transparency, that's what StrikeGraph does. We're a preparer. We do not audit. We work with company as well as the auditors to make sure that that process is as streamlined, as efficient, and as successful as we can possibly make it. My own experience, and this is frankly why I'm a co-founder of StrikeGraph. Like I'm a wonderful team. Like we are building the product that I wish I had in all those different, VC backed and non-VC backed companies. This is the product that I needed because I did it myself. I had, in some cases, did some help, had some help with outside consultants, but if I really kind of look and total up the dollars and time, I can't even, the time and frankly, the revenue that got missed, either because we lost out because we didn't have a SOC 2, or there's always the deals that you don't even get invited to the table because you don't have it. I can't really put a price tag on that one, but I can tell you that from a StrikeGraph perspective, we are driving down the cost on the preparation side of the fence quite a bit. It's not uncommon for a company right now. Like when I was going out and sort of pricing a SOC 2 on my own, I'm talking to an auditor and they're pitching 50 to 60K for the audit, right? Just a dollar amount that as a bootstrap company was pretty painful. From our perspective, what we're doing is because we can bring services and software in that combination together, we can drive efficiencies and we drive the cost on the preparation, just the overall SOC 2 down quite a bit. And the second part of that question is how can we more and see the platform? Definitely not the right. I'd love to show you the platform today, but probably not the right time to show you. You can just reach out to me directly, sales at StrikeGraph. You've got my name right here. Would love to spend 10, 15 minutes with anybody that's interested in going a little bit deeper, seeing from our perspective, like how our software and services work together to really make things easy for companies at any stage to get ready for a SOC 2 and have a successful audit, or just to get to a readiness state, and then have the ability to move into a SOC at their own timeline. We're always happy to help there. Great question though. Another good question. Policies. Is there a specific list of policies? The answer is actually, again, no, because it kind of goes back to controls. I think there is a little bit of a common misconception that, and especially as it relates to a SOC 2, you can't policy your way to a SOC 2. I think that some people think they can. Policies aren't really controls. However, policies are a vital piece of your control set. They end up, for us, they end up being proof in documentation form that I have certain practices, that I have certain controls in place. I would say, though, there is a set, certainly when we engage with a customer, and let's say they're brand new, they have like no policies, maybe they have an NDA. We certainly have an endless list of policies that we can bring to bear. None of our customers ever write a policy from scratch, which is fantastic. But we're not over policing people. You're not going to walk away with 20, 30 policies as part of your sort of your practice. There's definitely a common set of policies that can include acceptable use, employee-related policies, business continuity, list kind of goes on and on. Incident management, change management, risk management. Those sound kind of big and horrible, but we have different types of templates that we bring in if you're just getting started, or maybe you're 100, 1,000, 10,000 person company. Well, we've got a set of policies that work over there as well. I think it's and it's one of those things that when we initially engage, and this maybe is going a little bit deeper in how we work initially with customers, is we quickly kind of assess where you are, and obviously what's kind of most important. What do we need to help you get, because you might have certain goals in there. We definitely bring policies into the equation as they're needed, not sort of policy first, and here's a bunch of documentation that you have to live by. We try and right size everything we do. And then I love the questions are flying like fast and furious. Integration is a key component to what we do, and I think that's part of, I kind of mentioned it inside of this, like you want to operationalize these controls longer term. And part of that operationalizing of the controls is not just living by those practices and just doing them, but where you can, bringing systems, bringing integrations in to make sure that from a proof perspective, because that's a key thing, right? If I go get a SOC 2 report, it's like, think of it as continuous compliance, right? I'm going to go back and have a refresh report at some stage in the future. I want to be able to show that I'm still doing those controls. Well, part of that show or that proof is what we call evidence. It's proof that you're doing those controls, right? So it could be a change management control where I need to show that tickets are coming in for a change, for promotion from QA on up to production. I got a change request that's been, added, approved, and then resolved. Well, we definitely don't like our customers having to grab screenshots or provide sample tickets to then show the auditor. That's just heavy lifting that we feel you shouldn't have to do. So from an integration perspective, we're continuously, by the way, rolling out integrations, but we integrate with document management systems, the Google Docs and Office 365s of the world, to kind of collect that type of information. Integrate with cloud providers. Azure is asked here. Microsoft's in our backyard. So of course, Amazon's in our backyard too. We're in the Seattle, Washington area. So we have to play fair and integrate with both the AWS and Azure side of the fence, with plans of integration around change management systems, as well as code repositories as well, kind of the usual suspects. For us, integration is such a vital piece of what we're doing. We have an entire R&D team that's carved out, and all they do is build integrations that we can use to make that operationalizing piece become a lot easier for companies as they grow and scale. Oh, and I got a shout out. Somebody else is here in Seattle. So still football season, so go Hawks, even though we're kind of out of it. Another good one here. Different about our approach. So again, maybe diving into a little bit more strike graph specific things. So certainly love to have, reach out to us, please, if you want to have a little bit more one-on-one. We can go a lot deeper. But certainly what sets us apart, I think, from, and really what helps us accelerate a company's journey to get that cybersecurity program scoped out, to have it become such a great sales accelerator. And again, maybe the goal is to get that SOC 2 report. We're going to get you there quickly, efficiently, and have a successful engagement around that. But oftentimes we want to get you to a point where even before the SOC 2, you're able to leverage your practice as a sales accelerator. How we're able to do that is because we take a risk-based approach. So we look at your company through the lens of risks. And part of our secret sauce is, as you go through and assess your risks within our product is promoting and suggesting practices, controls that you should be doing. And you're probably doing a bunch of them already. So we want to give you credit for what you're already doing, but that our product essentially draws out of you best practices, what you're doing, gives you examples, and maybe there's a few things that you should add to your program or practice that you're not doing today. And it automatically aligns to the SOC 2 framework. So that piece I mentioned earlier, like one of the traps to avoid, or one of the things that I learned was, don't just build a program kind of out there, have it align to a particular security framework. StrikeRap does that immediately. Again, I'll go back to, like, this is the product that I wish I had. So I didn't, so I frankly wouldn't run into all the traps that I ran into and have to clean up the mess like years later. I'm building a product that frankly I would have just loved to have had back then to avoid all of this mess. But risks for us are just, it's just the biggest thing. That helps us accelerate a company's journey. And it also helps us right size that scope. Again, it kind of checks the boxes on it. For me, it checks a couple of the things that I ran into immediately, just with our approach. Within the first 30 days, you're ready to go into an auditor's office for potentially like a type 1 report. Or I should say, you're ready to actually take your cybersecurity practice. You have a bundle of material, whether it's policies, a security brief, your control set. Like, I can use that in conversations with prospective customers. That to me is key. Like, I want to help every single one of our customers have better conversations with their prospective customers right out of the gate. And that's what our system allows us to do. Another quick question. I didn't mention too much about pen testing. And I probably, shame on me, because that was part of, I ran into this trap where I thought I could just walk up and get a pen test like immediately, and then found that the scheduling was just as nasty as trying to schedule an auditor. We definitely are bringing, and it's kind of interesting, it's exciting news, and we'll talk about it more. Well, I will probably do some press or things around that, but actually we are bringing the capabilities in-house to provide pen testing for our customers. It's a piece of it, with all the customers that we deal with, we're definitely working with software as a service. Actually, we have a few services companies, but I would say 99.9% of our customers, they need a pen test. They need a pen test for customers. They need a pen test for a SOC 2 as well. We felt it was just a natural part of what we were doing to offer those services up. That it's just kind of ends up as a win-win. Biggest thing is on the scheduling side of the fence, because we can control the scheduling. We can absolutely make sure that a pen test is not a holdup for a particular audit. We just have really great capabilities. We're super excited about it. Something that we are just now adding here in January, and we'll officially kind of market and message that out in February. So definitely stay tuned for that. Here's a good one. I love this question, and hopefully everyone can hang on for this one. There's a vendor, we have a question, it's like, and this is a sort of a scenario, one vendor who's not SOC compliant. And because there's and then you've got deep integration around it. So is there a pathway for an exemption for certain vendors? Like, basically, how do you address those sort of shortcomings? Michelle she might have some experience around this one a little bit as well. I've certainly run into this one myself with a third party. And frankly, in some cases, when I didn't have that SOC 2, I was the vendor that people were integrating, and I was that one that wasn't SOC 2 compliant. So, and I'll let Michelle maybe answer from more of a SOC 2 from an auditor's point of view, how I sort of got around, I don't want to call it get around, but how I solved this problem from a practitioner's perspective it was really around, well, I didn't call them controls at the time, but around controls. So, if you're dealing with a vendor that doesn't have a SOC 2 or ISO, and you let's say it's a critical vendor, you got deep integration and you're transmitting data, you're going to want to put additional practices, additional controls. Frankly, you may even go as far as having particular contract language with that vendor that says, look, you're not SOC 2, you're not ISO, maybe you can't steer them to go get that report, but what you can do is have them obligated to maybe add additional discipline around that engagement. Your employees are not going to process this information. You're going to do things a certain way. Let me highlight the rules of engagement between you and I. And then on your side, like on your staff, how do you have the checks and balances? Make sure that you have vendor management controls, that you're continuously looking at that vendor to make sure that they're not doing anything wrong, so to speak. So there's ways that you can kind of buffer it a little bit to say, look, we know that we have a vendor that doesn't have a SOC 2 report, isn't ISO certified, but we acknowledge that, and here's our mitigation around that. We've got more controls internally. We are requiring them to do certain things, certain checks and balances. Attestations is a great approach on that side of the fence. Michelle, I don't know if you have anything to add based on what you said.
Yeah, those were fantastic suggestions. I would look at a risk-based approach. Are they handling risky data? Just think about what could go wrong with that vendor relationship, and then apply minimum contractually obligated controls to them based on the risk level.
That's awesome. Yeah, I completely agree. And it's kind of one of those things. And again, I think we're out of this mindset or this sort of mode of operating, but that question just reminds me of how I used to have to tap dance early on in one of my roles. I didn't have a SOC 2 report. I would have customers sort of asking for it. And again, this is more like 5 or so years ago. I wasn't trying to hide anything. It was really just cost prohibitive. I was trying to bootstrap company. That $60K price point for a SOC 2, frankly, I just couldn't do it, right? I was just trying to get the company off the ground. So it was that, how do I answer the prospect saying, hey, can I have your SOC 2 report? How did I get around it? Well, 5 years ago plus, you could actually kind of say, well, I'm Amazon or I'm Azure and they're SOC 2, so therefore I'm SOC 2. Obviously, that's not the way things work today, but man, it was such an interesting tap dance and this sort of back and forth. And again, it led to when I wasn't able to provide that documentation, provide that transparency and trust through a SOC 2 report, what happened? Well, I had to answer questionnaires on either an annual or semi-annual basis. I would have interesting control, like contract language being put in to make sure that, hey, if you're not doing this, great, but we're going to hold you to a standard and you're not going to like it. Like you're going to have to you're going to have to open it up. Like you're going to have twice a year conversation with our CTO, our DevOps, our CISO. I mean, I had a few of those. And it worked okay. Didn't work as well when I started to get, a couple of hundred customers and I started to have dozens, right? It doesn't scale very well. So that's where that SOC 2 report really helped kind of drive that in, kind of normalize everything, build that transparency and trust. One quick question, I like this one. Is there a pursuant to SOC 2 answer that we can give our prospective clients who are asking for this cert? The answer is yes. However, to do that, you will want to, and again, selfish plug, I suppose, you'll want to engage a preparer and you'll want to have an auditor relationship. And what you can do in that type of scenario is the auditor, most often in that scenario, even though you have a preparer, you have an auditor, they're going to issue what's called a comfort letter or an engagement letter. And it's essentially pursuant to SOC 2. It says, you're taking this serious. You're going down to the path of SOC 2. You have a preparer engaged to help you with the controls and the proof around those controls, the risks, et cetera, et cetera. And you've engaged an auditor to do the audit, and there will be a timeline, like, or a time, I should say, associated with that, like where it should be done by X. Most of the time, those comfort letters or engagement letters, as long as they're not like 3, 4, 6 quarters into the future, you're going to be in good shape. So I would say, if I had a customer today asking me for that, and I know that I needed to have this, I do sort of that, I engage a preparer, I engage an auditor. That comfort letter could be, it could be end of Q2, early Q3, and it should work for most customers. But they will definitely look at that and say, you're on your way, you're on your path, you're committed to this. That's a great question, right? And that kind of goes into, there's a lot of flexibility as it relates to a SOC 2, and not so much a topic for today, but a type 1 report versus a type 2 report. You can start with a type 1, go into a type 2, you can go straight to a type 2. You can start to go down the path, have things like an engagement letter. You control a lot of this. So I think a lot of times customers will come to us and they feel that they just got one solution. And again, contractually, contractual obligations aside, they might come to us and say, I can only go after a type 2 and it's the end of the year. I wish I had it sooner. And it might actually make more sense for them to get a type 1 because maybe they're brand new. They have none of these controls in place. So we want to de-risk things by operationalizing like getting the control set, having the type 1 report in hand, and then they do a type 2 at the end of the year. And there's all sorts of factors that weigh in: timing, organizational maturity, cost, obviously, but it's not a one or the other. Like that's definitely where I think partnerships and having somebody else that has kind of seen it before that can provide some guidance, it'll save you a lot of time and effort and hopefully de-stress things. I know I was super stressed out back in the day with like, I don't know what to do. So, all right, and looks like this is the last question, and make sure that we can get everyone on their out of here on time, I suppose. Okay, questions a little bit around cost, but a range on the auditor's fees and expenses. So again, we're not an auditor. We're on the preparation side of the house, but from an auditor perspective, there's different sort of tiers, I guess, of auditors. And when I say tiers, it's more branding, right? So like I'll kind of throw out, like, I'm not going to talk about E&Y and Deloitte and all those, like the big 5. That's definitely going to be a high cost. There's certainly some regional, let's call them regional auditors. So ones that have more of a national presence, they tend to command a little bit of a higher dollar amount. So whether you're going for a type 1 or type 2 report, and again, I'm not going to talk about, like, we work with a lot of different auditors. We have some audit partners that frankly will give again, sounds like a shameless plug coming. They give a pretty decent discount because they're working with a strike graph and they know that they can perform their work very efficient. If I just remove that for a second and say, if I was going out today and pricing a SOC 2 type 1 or type 2, and I'm not going to the E&Ys of the world, and maybe I'm not going to, there's definitely sort of like a report mill style companies that are at the very low end of the price point. But I would expect to pay between 30 and 40K for a SOC 2 type 1 or type 2 for, let's call it maybe more of a boutique kind of, more like a local auditor. That sounds like it's a small auditor, doesn't necessarily mean it's a small auditor, but I would say you're looking at probably 30 to 40K on that one. And definitely the price has come down from when I looked at it like years ago. It was closer to, there wasn't a whole lot. It wasn't, the amount of auditors was a lot smaller, right? And it was super expensive. It's still a pretty significant cost today. Good news is certainly with our audit partners, they recognize that a customer using us, you gain a ton of efficiency, so you can actually drive that cost of that audit down, and really, it really helps out quite a bit. But it's definitely, and again, look at it as not a cost center or expense. It's obviously an expense, but this is something that's going to unlock revenue. So you go down that path, you get that SOC 2 report, you're going to speed up time to closes. You're going to be able to command or hold your price point in a lot of cases because you've invested the dollars in your security program or practice. But that's kind of a range I would give you, 30 to 40K. It's to see where that's at. All right. Well, hey, I love the questions. I'm glad we were able to get a few of those out there, and certainly, again, really appreciate everybody's time today. I think it's awesome that you hopefully walk away with just a nugget here and there. It's always great for us to be able to share what we've learned from our past experiences. Definitely keep an eye on strikegraph.com for our webinar series. We're going to have, like I mentioned, a bunch of these throughout the year. Hopefully, one or two of these more informational ones on every month, where we can share. We'll bring in guest speakers, people that we work with, customers, auditors, practitioners, etc., to kind of spread the knowledge a little bit. If you're interested in learning more about StrikeGraph, like our software, our solution, how we really help customers down this path, just reach out to us. We are always happy to have a quick 10-15 minute conversation, learn a little bit more about where you're at, what your goals are, and just to see if we can help. So again, appreciate everyone's time today, and we'll let you run to your next call, and just let us know if there's any way we can help. Thank you. Take care.